Welcome to Building My Legacy podcast. This podcast is designed for leaders and entrepreneurs who want to leave a legacy and will provide strategies that focus upon key elements for legacy creation, determining your desired impact and its benefit, increasing your legacy's reach by engaging key stakeholders, planning, prioritizing, and executing. Here's your host, Dr. Lois Sonstegard.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the last of this 5-part series on how to navigate the corporate world. I'm here again with Karen Whitaker, and we are going to focus today on what will the future leader manager look like. And Karen has some marvelous observations that she's made from her experiences in various positions. And so, Karen, I'm going to let you take it from here and share with us some of your observations.
Yes. So I think we've mentioned this in our prior conversations, but the workforce is changing quite drastically from the talent staying in positions for 5-10 years. That kind of is trending towards 2 to 3 years, right? Max. We're in a very competitive market right now for talent, and there are a lot of companies that are stepping up and throwing nice carrots out there and to attract that new talent. So when I think about that and future leaders, to me, if that is the trend and that is the environment, if that continues, then I see leaders becoming more like managers and coaches. So I would say a combination of the two, because I think the Gallup study says that 85% of people leave a job because of their manager. That will be questionable in the future. Because that trend towards that shorter span with a company, that can't just because we have all bad managers, right? There's other influencers that are causing that trend, right? So I think the best that you can do in the future is to look at it a little bit differently. Like, you have a short time with this talent. How do I keep them as engaged as possible and as productive as possible in the time that I have them?
Okay, so part of what I'm hearing you say, I just want to interject this. Part of what you're saying is that what we're seeing with the younger people, they're turning more frequently. So no matter what we do, our time with this next generation of employee is going to be a shorter period of time, right? Is that correct?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, it's not only will will people be leaving because of the manager, but they're going to be leaving because of opportunities. Okay.
Right.
So
right.
I would
say less than this manager mindset than opportunity. And so if that's the case, then what am I going to do in that time frame to ensure that again, high productivity, high engagement, but also what can I do? Because obviously, I still aspire to be a leader. And so how do I create the connection that will go beyond that 3-year mark, right? Where either leads to new opportunities for myself or for me to be able to bring in new talent based on their recommendation because of their experience with me as a leader, right? So, what are your thoughts on that?
So if people are leaving and we know that they're going to, that's sort of a state of the art, Gallup's research really didn't take a look at if given the opportunity, would they stay? Although I think part of what they did find is that when people were mentored and coached and there was career development in place for them, your millennials and Gen Z would continue to stay at least for a longer period of time. But you are so right in that we're beginning to see a churn. It used to be just the top that would churn. You would come and you'd say, okay, this group will be laid off, this person will be laid off, and it would happen suddenly, instantly, without people's preparation. And now we have workers entering the workforce that are saying the same, but to the organization. I've gotten what I can out of this, I'm done. And if you can't give me or show me more, I can't stay because it's my life, my career, my future. And so it's an interesting juxtaposition because what the organization has been doing to the employee is now doing in return to the organization. And the organization doesn't know how to respond to that because we're used to just being able to grow and have people for whatever period of time. So it's a new psychology that we're dealing with. And I think one of the things that you have talked about, Karen, is that one of the things that as a manager we need to begin to look at then is how are those relationships developed? So when the person does exit the organization, they leave wanting to maintain a relationship. So you're building a network. Speak about that a little bit more, because I think that is a fundamental change, but a huge one.
It is, and I think that's where it comes back to the coaching aspect of things, right? So not only just the relationship, but showing that you can provide value for them, that individual, while they're with you and beyond when they're not with you, right?
Right.
There was another article that I read. It talked about the future leader will have to be an expert in cultural management. And I think that's huge. Not only for, I think it's attracting new talent, maintaining them for as long as you can, and then ensuring that you're getting the most engagement and productivity out of them while you do have them. I keep going back to that productivity and engagement because there's all kinds of studies right now on how do you and ideas on how we increase those two things.
Right.
And companies are taking measures to ensure that those remain high or are fixing issues. But a survey going out to your employees and coming back, and then committees deciding, okay, what do we implement based on this feedback? You're obviously not going to hit everyone's complaints or concerns or hot points with any kind of initiative. So really it then goes back to the manager on the kind of culture that they're projecting for the people that report to them.
So, the interesting thing is if we accept that employment is going to be for a short period of time, that also shifts what we do and invest in terms of development, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So what we choose for that becomes very different. And it may be one of the elements that really will differentiate a company that's able to get good talent versus those who are not able to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It'll be interesting because I think we don't know. I posed this question to my husband and gosh, I mean, there's so many different variables on what that future, all we can do right now is it's a best guess based on the trends that we see right now. Right.
Right.
And then follow those companies that are having more success and engaging people for a longer period of time.
I want to get back to what you're saying about network and culture, because when I work with multinationals, one of the things that I observe is just take a look at language. We have the expats and the nationals. Already we've created two different groups of which we have two different opinions, right? So part of what people are looking for with culture is we talk a lot about diversity, but integration. How are we really integrating people? We want women. How are we integrating them? Because just to have somebody present doesn't solve that problem unless, we haven't gotten the innovation, the creativity that women bring that's different, or that other minority groups bring that's different, if we don't really include them. The other thing is with the multinationals, if you're looking at it as very short term, or they're turnable because they're not us, you've created an in group and an out group. The nationals are the out group, the expats are the in group. The motivation to stay is very low, right? Very low. So then as people move out, the networks, what are the networks that they're going to leave with? And I think that's a huge next question, because the taste that you leave that organization with is what you're going to share with the world outside.
Oh, absolutely. We see that with, what is it, Glassdoor, or the in the medical device, is it Glassdoor? There are a couple of websites that are, when you're looking at a company to apply for a role with, you check out these websites to see what other past employers are saying about them. So, we're being rated all the time.
All the time. Yes.
And it's, so this, and that's today's environment. I can't even imagine what it's going to morph into the future.
Well, I think one of the things that we're beginning to see in Europe, the trend, and I think we talked about this briefly in another one of our podcasts, is we're beginning to see a trend of not mergers and acquisitions as much as networks, partners. So they're loose. You move in and out of them. At this time, we're going to need this kind of partnership. Well, those partnerships become easy if the people who leave say, wow, I know a great company that we should partner with, right? And they share that information. They help create the networks and bring people together. On the other hand, if they leave and say, wow, I can tell you who not to go to, now you have another set of problems that you need to deal with. And I do think in the future, the companies that are going to do well are the ones who can create partnerships that are loose and that are going to depend upon the networks that were established.
Absolutely. So then, and that's where it falls back on leadership and culture too, right? In managing that, ensuring that that experience is a positive one and can parlay into those future kind of partnerships, right? Once your talent moves on to better opportunities, right?
And they will. Yeah, they will. So another thing that I think is fascinating is that some of what the Gallup research has shown is that if you're going to really have a sphere of influence as a leader and a manager, you can't just do it with your immediate network or people that are within your immediate sphere. You've got to go 2-3 rows below you and above you. And they argue that the reason why that's important is partly because of the churn of people, but nobody has enough sphere of influence. So you depend upon those next groups to get the information out to the next group and the next group. And I don't think we often think enough about what are 2 and 3 layers above me that I need to network with and create partnerships with, and what are the 2-3 layers below me that I also need to establish that relationship with. And that's a different way of looking, because now we've got more people to manage, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I always made a conscious effort to do that. I think it's my interactions and reach would be in the way that I treated people was consistent at my peer level and all the way, like you said, several layers below and several layers above, because I didn't know what my future, where I was going to land within the organization or outside of the organization. And so, but it takes a conscious effort. I mean, that doesn't, I can say the opposite for several other managers who didn't care. And I think it leaves you very vulnerable if you're not making a conscious effort to do that.
It's another form of assessment, isn't it, of leadership? How many layers above and below are you influencing, and how are you going about doing that? Because I don't, in some organizations, that certainly is an area that they look at. But perhaps it's as important an incentive as other things that we bonus people for, because it's the future of the company.
Mm-hmm. But again, too, you have to create a culture that fosters those kind of incentivizes people to do that, or that doesn't make people feel afraid, especially going up, like you said. I can tell you from my experience that I was in a part of an organization that didn't. It was, you did not jump above your manager. You stayed below, off the radar as much as possible. And there were, that was, I worked around it, but it was kind of a scary environment to be in that situation, right?
Right. So there's two sides to that, isn't there? You can have people who are always jumping over the manager, not respecting the manager's position. And the other is one who can work above the manager, being very respectful and including the manager so the manager doesn't have to be threatened. But it's a level of emotional intelligence that we need to begin to assess for as we move people through the organization, because if we're going to develop in this way, we have to have that level of emotional intelligence or we can't achieve our goals.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So the other thing, Karen, that you also have talked about is that what people are really looking for in organizations and leaders and managers is they want to feel valued. And it's part of what we're just talking about. They want to feel valued, trusted, empowered. And that word empowered, I think, has gotten so overused, and yet it is such an incredibly important word, because it's when we feel empowered, we tend to rise to the occasion. And I think of many years ago, a person who was in the real estate business, a very big person in the San Francisco real estate environment. Somebody had walked into the office. The owner was not there, and they said, "I would like to speak to the owner." And the receptionist said, "I'm sorry, he's not available at this time. How can I help you?" And he said, "Well, I don't think you can. I really want to speak with the owner." And she persisted and said, "I really would like to know how I can help, because I can steer you in the right way most efficiently if I know." And he said, "It is the CEO, the owner of the company, with whom I need to speak." And then he said, "Why should I trust you with what my need is? Because you're only a receptionist." And her response was, "In this organization, each of us are empowered to do whatever it takes to make this company profitable and to bring in new business." So she said, "I am empowered to do whatever needs to be done." And so if you'd like to share, share. So the point is, we make assumptions about people, and she really got the message. She was empowered. And she then was bold, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we don't feel empowered, we also aren't bold. We don't take risks. We don't do what needs to be done. And it wasn't that she was being disrespectful. She was just laying it out there in terms of, look, I can help you. And
right.
and she was empowered to do that.
So that's interesting. When you say she was empowered to do that, I mean, but then she was bold. I mean, she really, she took a bold step in doing that. I think she had some self-empowerment to say, you know what, I'm going to ensure that my voice is heard. I see something that can be fixed, but that it sounds like she, even though the environment wasn't necessarily saying or encouraging that, she stepped out outside of that and said, I'm going to take a risk. I'm going to be bold, which is interesting because that's been my last year. My husband and I had a goal of be bold, and this year was be bolder.
Oh, interesting. Very interesting.
That's our mantra for the year: be bolder. It's amazing when you make that how that can impact your decision making. Because I am taking more risks, and I'm ensuring that I'm being heard, and I am just because I've set my mind to, okay, I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to be bolder.
Right. And I think, so each of us needs to be able to step back, and I think that's part of emotional intelligence and what leaders need to be able to do is, am I being too bold? Am I being bold enough? What voice do I need today to be effective for what I'm trying to achieve? And for some of us, especially women, it's knowing that bold voice so we can step into it. For assertive and overachieving men, it tends to be, how do I soften and listen more? Mm-hmm. So we step into things a little differently depending upon how our voice is perceived. But for women particularly, I think that to be emboldened is huge, because we're brought up being taught to be demure. Nice girls don't do that. They're more quiet. That success requires that we're bold when we need to be.
Mm-hmm. And I think that this trend that we're talking about with younger people moving more frequently, that is going to force that future leader to change their practices. Like you said, men need to start listening more. I mean, if that old practice of do it because I said to do it is that you will not maintain your workforce with that attitude. And so by its very nature, it's going to start weeding out either those that can't change or won't change, right? And force those that are moving into those positions to continually work on those natural tendencies and to change behaviors that we tend to do because we saw it. That was the example that we grew up under. Does that make sense?
Right.
So, in organizations right now, you probably have some leaders that don't have that. I'm going to listen to my people. I'm going to foster an environment of trust and engagement and making people feel valued. So I'm a manager. That's what I see in my senior leadership. That's the example that I have. But with this trend, it's going to force me to say, okay, that's not what I want to be. That's not helping me keep the engagement high and keeping productivity high. So I'm going to have to change that and set a different example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that we don't spend enough time sorting is what's people's perceptions of what we're doing. So for some people, some women are looked at as being overly aggressive, for example. And it's like, keep your hands off of her, right? Or they may be seen as being too timid, unable to take risk. So part of same thing is true of men. So part of what we need to do is to begin to look at, how am I being perceived? Where's the gap between what I think I am, what I want to be, and what people are perceiving? How do I need to change to get through that gap? And one of the things that, I hear from people is, well, how do you solve that issue, right? And I mean, how do I know what that perception gap is and how do I resolve it? Well, part of it is you ask and then you do something about it. But again, that's boldness. You have to ask out of humility, and then you have to listen and then let people know what you're doing about what their suggestion is or why would they give input. But we tend to think we know what needs to be done because it worked the last time. But in this particular situation, it's different people, different circumstances. We may need to show up in a different way in order to be successful. And I think that's where it becomes so tricky, is because we're always needing to adapt and adjust to our current environment.
Right. And we touched on this a couple conversations back on the stay interview. I mean, I think that was a practice that I implemented that helped me get that feedback from my direct reports on how I was doing. So I think that's a practice that we could use more of, right?
Yeah.
What's causing you to stay? How am I doing as a manager? And trust me, it's not a very comfortable, especially the initial conversation, because you are making yourself vulnerable. And of course, the direct report is like, oh my gosh, how can I really be honest? But if it's put into regular practice, I think that that those barriers will, or those concerns will be alleviated. Understanding that's a trusting environment, and it depends on how you manage the conversation to get them to open up to and let them know that it's safe to be a little bit critical.
Yeah. And I think what I have found is that often there'll be one or two people who will test it. Are you really serious? And so they'll be hypercritical, and you walk away going, oh, wow, I don't know if I'm going to do that again. And
Right.
It really is a test. And when you come back, take them seriously, come back and say, okay, out of what you said, here are some things I think we need to work on. I will work on, and this is how I'm going to manage it. What do you think? And I want your help as I work on this. They see that you're humble enough to accept criticism. Mm-hmm. And now it means that they in turn can do the same. And so it becomes very much a two-way street in terms of what can happen next.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people feel like they are constantly being judged, right? So to kind of flip that and say, okay, it's okay to, I'm not infallible as a manager. I make mistakes all the time. And in those conversations, a lot of times I would bring up, I do a lot of self-reflection. I was very aware of what my shortcomings were. So even, being self-critical in that conversation to allow them to understand that it's a safe environment and that they can speak freely.
It's that honesty and that humility that's so huge. Can't have trust without it. And that is what our younger generation of workers are looking for. It is what I think everybody's looking for. How secure am I? Can I trust you? Do you care about what I do and how I do it? Or am I just a number?
Absolutely. And, making sure that, especially with this younger generation, they understand their why. And that's just because I said so isn't going to fly any longer. So it's making sure that we're communicating and giving people the why we're asking them to do certain things, and let them feel empowered, like you said, or valued, that they are trusted to be a part of decision making and setting direction and that kind of thing.
You know, what's interesting with what you just said, Karen, is that Gallup's research shows that only 22% of employees think that their boss, leader, manager knows the right direction for the organization. That's amazing,
Wow.
right?
Yes.
So when you start looking at why, you can see why there's a disconnect, because if there's a sense that the leaders don't understand the direction or why they're doing things within the organization, people underneath can't match it, can't see how they fit. And so there's going to be that rift or that disappointment that you begin to see happening in the workplace.
100%.
Karen, it is absolutely amazing. We have talked for 30 minutes and it has been just so wonderful. I have enjoyed these sessions so much with you, and I know that our listeners will feel the same because it's practical information, what you deal with every single day. And although this deals with how to navigate the work environment, the corporate world, it also is the same for how do we navigate in building our legacy, because it is our networks that are going to determine the direction that we can take with legacy building. And so I just really, really appreciate the time and the thought that you've put into this. And for our audience, if you have questions, you have thoughts, you'd like to make comments, you have suggestions about other things that you would like us to speak about, please send us an email, and we will be taking these sessions that we've done with Karen and putting it together in compiling it as one paper, so you can get a sense as to what you might be able to do to navigate this corporate world. And we'd love to make it available to you. Just email me and I will send it to you, Lois at buildtomorrow.com. It's in our podcast information as well. But before we leave, thank you, Karen, so much for all your time.
I've enjoyed it. I'm sad that we're coming to an end, but I think this is just the beginning for us.
We'll do another. We'll do some more. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Building My Legacy podcast with Dr. Lois Sonstegard. To book your appointment with Dr. Sonstegard, visit www.buildtomorrow.com.